What's up guys, it's Topsy, and here we are with the last installment of rating every single SpeedDuel starter deck. And for today's episode, we are covering the baddies themselves, both Marik and Bakura. But before we can get started, let's go ahead and clear up very quickly what criteria we're going to be using to grade each of these decks. Of course, we're going to be grading each of these strategies based on the 20 card deck you're expected to play alongside their adjacent skill. Additionally, we're going to be looking at each of these decks with their ability to be consistently pulling off their strategy, the overall power of that strategy, and finally the overall quality of all their other cards in the deck. With all that being said, let's get started. Alright then, so we're going to be starting off today's episode by grading Bakura himself, and he has quite the interesting strategy. Taking a look at Bakura's deck, the first thing we notice is the Dark Necrophear, which is a really interesting boss monster, not good in particular, but interesting nevertheless. The next thing we notice is that he has a lot of vanillas, and I mean a lot of them, just look at how many he has. But luckily enough, they are fiends. The vanillas are very underwhelming. The only notable ones that we can mention are cards like Whiptail Crow that does meet the 1600 attack threshold, and at that exceeding it with 50 points. And I guess cards like Earthbound Spirit and the Gross Ghost of the Fled Dreams just because they have relatively high defenses. But besides that, yeah, they're all pretty bad. The next thing we notice is that Bakura has a lot of effect monsters, and at that, a good amount of them are all tribute monsters. Cards like Gap, Dark Ruler Hades, Puppet Monster, and Lesser Fiend. Now, I'm not going to say that these cards are bad in particular. The Lesser Fiend, Dark Ruler Hades, and the Gap in particular are pretty good, all things considered. However, the Puppet Master isn't great, it's more niche, it's only okay, it's mediocre, I'll say. But let's move down some more. We do have some more effect monsters though, that can't just be normal summoned. Cards like Twin-Headed Wolf, Prometheus King, Lance Archfiend, the Dark Mimics for both level 1 and 3, Mask of Darkness, and Mad Reloader. Now, there are a few cards here that I do like. The Mad Reloader and both the Mimics are cards that I like quite a bit just because they offer the deck a lot of consistency, which is really great. Mask of Darkness is hit or miss depending on the deck because if you have very powerful trap cards, this card's amazing. If not, it's very underwhelming, of course. And last card that I want to mention, I guess, would be the Lance for Archfiend just because it does give you piercing damage. And you know what, we'll throw in the Prometheus King while we're at it too, just because its effect to banish a dark monster to go ahead and gain a 400 attack stat isn't half bad. So the monster lineup is interesting. There are some really cool pieces, but overall, there's a lot of very questionable choices. Moving down to the spell cards now, things look a lot better. We have this Sword of Dark Destruction, which is an okay equipped spell. Offering to the Doom is genuinely very powerful. Twister is okay backward removal. Dark Eruption gives you more hand consistency. Veil of Darkness alongside Allure Darkness are both two pieces of draw power, which is awesome and very much needed in decks like these. And finally, Creeping Darkness is very interesting because if you're able to pull it off, being able to search out any level 4 dark seems pretty powerful. However, the lineup of level 4 darks isn't that great, as we saw, like they were all just like mediocre. We now move on to the trap cards, and these are honestly just phenomenal. Zone of the Spirit and the Forceful Checkpoint in particular are two very powerful cards. So powerful in fact that I believe, if I'm not wrong, the Forceful Checkpoint has been restricted in some way, shape, or form, and Zone of the Spirit's been at 1 like forever, it feels like. So yeah, pretty okay cards if I do say so myself. As for Common Charity, just given how many vanillas we have in the deck, this is just a good card overall. So honestly, I'm very confused as for Bakura's deck because the monster lineup is, as I said, underwhelming, but once we get to the spell and trap cards, it starts looking very promising. With that being said, let's take a look at his actual pre-built decks. Alright, as we can see, Bakura has two separate decks, those being Inner Conflict and Into the Darkness Below. And both of them are very interesting in the way they work. And I did have one big issue with the construction of these decks, and you'll see it once we start reading the skills. So let's take a quick look at Inner Conflict first. This deck makes use of a couple of the vanilla monsters. The thing is, I guess these are like the least egregious ones. We do see the Earthbound Spirit and the Whiptail Crow as two of the better vanilla monsters alongside the Headless Knight and the Gross Ghost of the Field of Dreams. Moving down to the monsters, we have Dark Necrophear, Gap, Dark Ruler Hades, Puppet Master, and Lesser Fiend. That is a lot of high level monsters. one too many. Um, and this is gonna be a big issue in my opinion, just because getting this many like high level monsters feels really, really bad. But I guess we have somewhat of a silver lining because we do also get cards like the Twin-Headed Wolf, the Prometheus King, Lance Archfiend, and the Dark Mimics. Those cards are okay, they're not bad, and because we do have Dark Necrofear, I guess it makes sense having some of the weaker monsters here just because you can have them in the graveyard. So I don't hate it completely. We now move on to the spell cards, and we can see cards like Offering to the Doom, Twister, Veil of Darkness, and Allure of Darkness. I do appreciate that in the spell card lineup, we do have a lot of consistency with the Veil and the Allure, two great cards, and Offering to the Doom is going to be very important to be able to out problematic monsters. And Twister, as I said, every deck does need back removal, so at least we did add it to this one, so that's awesome. The last cards here are Zoma and the Forceful Checkpoint. These are inarguably the best trap cards in the deck, and you know what? This helps a lot because the spell and trap card lineup is very, very strong. But what about the skill? Does this skill tie the whole deck together? Well, let's take a look at it. The skill the Bakura gets for this deck in particular is Inner Conflict, and it reads, once per duel, during your main phase, you can pay 2,000 life points and take control of one monster your opponent controls that can be normal summon or set until the end phase. But it cannot attack directly or be attributed this turn. And this skill was so close to being great. Honestly, as a whole, I am not a huge fan of this skill. And the main reason why is because you aren't allowed to tribute summon with that monster you took control of. There is very, very little you can do with that monster, because also in addition to not be able to tribute it away, you can't attack directly with it, which really sucks and kind of makes it difficult to go for a game. I guess you could just reorder the way you attack during that turn in order to make it to where you're able to still go for game that way, but honestly, the skill is very mediocre and I don't think it does enough for the strategy. The main reason I would have loved for you to be able to tribute summon using that monster you took control of is because of how many like large monsters that need tributes are in this deck. If that was the case, this would make them significantly better and boost this deck drastically. So I'm very conflicted with this deck as a skill. I mean, no pun intended, honestly. You know, it's gonna be hard to grade this one. Well, let's go ahead and check out the other one though. The second deck of Bakura is very interestingly designed. As you can see, they pretty much added every vanilla in the deck, and this could prove to be a really, really negative effect of the deck. But let's take a look at the effect monsters now. For the effect monster lineup, we have cards like the Dark Ruler Hades, the Prometheus King, Mask of Darkness, and Mad Reloader. The effect monster lineup isn't half bad. Dark Ruler Hades is a really, really cool boss monster. As for the spell cards, we have the Sword of Dark Destruction, Offering to the Doom, Dark Eruption, and Creeping Darkness. And again, the spell card lineup isn't half bad at all. The Sword of Destruction probably being the weakest card here, just because it's a very middling equipped spell, but that's still not bad. And of course, the trap cards we've already said, they're broken. Just taking a look at the deck in its base form right here, it doesn't look all that intimidating just because of how many really bad vanillas are in the deck. But does the skill tie it all together and make use of all those vanillas? Well, let's take a look. See, the skill for this deck is Into the Darkness Below, and it reads, activate this skill during your main phase. Once per turn, you can discard one normal feed monster, then use the following skills. Draw one card, also flip this card over. Or, if you have 4 more feed monsters with different names, add one monster from your deck to your hand, also flip this card over. Here's the thing, why is this the skill for this deck in particular? You see, I figured that if the skills were to be flipped over, give the Into the Darkness skill to the Dark Necrofear deck, and then give the Inner Conflict skill to this deck, things would make a lot more sense. Of course, there would be a few other changes I would make, but this skill in particular reads a lot like a make Dark Necrofear very easy to summon, and this skill does a lot to help with that. Also, it searches you a monster once you get a lot of fiends in the graveyard, being the Dark Necrofear. It's honestly very, very frustrating just seeing how weirdly designed both of these decks are. Honestly, if I had to grade these decks, I believe that the Dark Necrofear deck, the Inner Conflict deck, is probably somewhere in B tier just because of how powerful a lot of those spell cards and trap cards they have are. But where in particular would I put it though? I genuinely think the spell and trap card lineup is powerful enough to carry it at least to like a middling B tier. And honestly, I could make an argument for it being better than the Perfectly Great Moth deck just because of cards like Offering to the Doom, but the Perfectly Great Moth deck is very, very consistent, so I'll leave it behind. As for the other deck, this one is very, very frustrating just because of the way it's designed. And honestly, I would have loved if they had switched the boss monsters for each of these decks, as I already mentioned. However, I think that we probably put this like at the top of C tier, just because it has a lot of great cards, but my goodness, that vanilla lineup is very bad. Yeah, I think I prefer it like that. Alright, now let's move on to Marik. Alright, so last character up is Marik, and let's see how well he does comparatively to Bakura. Alright, so taking a quick look at Marik's deck, it's not starting off too hot. The best card I've seen so far is the Lava Golem, being a very, very annoying kaiju that you can just tribute to your opponent's side of the field. But then we move on to the other monsters, and we see again a lot of vanillas, and at that, some very pitiful ones. Just take a look at these. These are some of the worst stats I've seen on monsters, with the exception of Gilgarth. This is just a genuinely good card. All these other ones, pretty bad. Moving down some more, we can see some other effect monsters. We have the Dark Lucius line with level 8 through level 4. Honestly, Dark Lucius is a pretty underwhelming level up monster that doesn't do all that much, and leveling it up in particular is very difficult given the very pitiful attacks that these monsters have. So honestly, good luck getting access to this boss monster. Moving down some more, we can see cards like Legendary Fiend, which can get out of control very quickly with its effect of getting 700 attack points every standby phase. We also have cards like Visor Shock, which is very interesting. However, I don't know how viable it is. I do like the effect to just bounce back every spell and trap card in the field, but it is one of the weaker monsters in the deck as well. Moving down, we see Helplumer and Mephist. These are two really cool boss monsters. However, I wish Mephist was a little more imposing with maybe like a 1900 attack stat line to mirror that of Parshaft. And Helplumer is very interesting, just being able to discard cards from your opponent's graveyard. It's a really funny card, but they're nothing to make me jump for joy here. We also have cards like Lady Assailant of Flames, which is an interesting addition to the deck, but it makes a lot of sense once you start reading some of the skills. Wrapping up the monsters, we have cards like Nudoria, Dark Jeroid, Drelago, and Bulgarian. Honestly, I'm not mad at any of these choices. These are all really cool monsters, but however, we can see something interesting. Bulgarian and Lady of Assailant follow a little theme of inflicting damage to your opponent, and this is going to be very relevant when we get to one of the skills that Marik has. As for the other monsters, the Nudoria and Dark Jeroid are two cards in particular that I like quite a bit just because Nudoria is able to out any monster, and Dark Jeroid goes ahead and reduces the attack of monsters your opponent controls by a sizable chunk, so that's honestly really, really useful. Moving down to the spell cards now, and things are looking pretty good here as well. We have cards like the Tribute to the Doom and the Supply Squad, two very, very powerful spells. But we also see some cards to try to supplement the deck we have, with cards like Level Up to make summoning Dark Lucius level 8 significantly easier. Creature Seizure is a really interesting card as well, because it makes having bad monsters kind of viable for you. Being able to give your opponent one of your bad vanillas and to get one of their hopefully better monsters is very, very strong, but again, very situational. And the last card for the spell card lineup is Faucia Bargain, which is again trying to really shoehorn that vanilla aspect of the deck, being able to destroy a special summon monster your opponent controls to special summon a vanilla from your hand. Again, this effect would be very, very powerful, but it seems very situational because it's tributing a special summon monster your opponent controls, and not all the decks do that. Moving down to the trap cards, and this is where things get really good. We have Rope of Life, Nightmare Wheel, Coffin Cellar, Metal Reflex Slime, and Rightful Roar. Now, all these trap cards are great, as I said. Rope of Life being able to recover a monster, Nightmare Wheel being able to immobilize an opponent's monster, Coffin Cellar trying to supplement one of the strategies that Marik has, Metal Reflex Slime being a very, very formidable defensive monster, and Prideful Roar allows you to out essentially any monster in the game, and that's honestly awesome. So now let's go ahead and break down each of these decks that Marik has access to. Alright then, so the two decks that Yami Marik has for himself are the Shadow Reborn deck alongside Twisted Personalities. And these two decks are pretty interesting. As we can see, if you're familiar with SpeedDuel at all, Twisted Personalities should be a name that really pops out to you, given that this is one of those skills that is, I believe, limited to one. And that says quite a lot about the skill, if it has to be limited in some way, shape, or form. But let's begin with the Shadow Reborn skill first. So the deck for this one is very interesting because it gives you the two biggest normals in the deck with the Malkit and the Gilgarth, so that's a good start. But also we can see the Dark Lucius line here, and we can start understanding what exactly this deck is trying to accomplish. Moving down, we can see the Lava Golem, the Legendary Fiend, Visor Shock, we have Heplimer, Mephist, Visor Daz, Nudoria, Dark Geroid, and Drill Lago. Overall, honestly, given the monster roster, this is an okay deck. I don't love the fact that we have this many like tribute monsters with the Dark Lucius line, the Lava Golem, the Helplimer, the Mephist. That's a little too many, honestly. But at least it does have some of the better monsters in the deck. Onto the spell cards now, we can see cards like the Tribute to the Doom, Level Up, and Supply Squad. Honestly, no issues here. Level Up helps with the Dark Lucius line, and Tribute to the Doom alongside Supply Squad are just genuinely good. As for the trap cards, again, honestly, no concerns here whatsoever. Rope, Metal Reflex Slam, and Prideful Roar are all very, very powerful. But what's the skill for this deck? What is it trying to do? Well, let's take a look. The skill for this deck is Shadow Reborn, and it reads, activate the skill during your main phase. Once per duel, you can pay half your life points and special summon one monster from either graveyard, but your opponent takes no battle damage this turn. Honestly, this is a very powerful skill. Having you just pay half your life points to special summon any monster from either graveyard is incredible, especially since when you take into consideration, this is trying to replicate the effect of Monster Reborn, one of the most powerful revival spells in all of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. The fact that your opponent takes no battle damage that turn is not that big of a deal, especially if you're able to bring back a very powerful boss monster to your field. And yeah, no, I honestly really like this skill. Does it really help the strategy it's in? Not really, but at least it's just an individually very powerful skill. Now onto the Twisted Personality deck. And as we can see, we have a lot of vanillas here. And that's interesting. Just because, as I said, a lot of these vanillas are very bad, with the exception of the Gilgarth. Trying to figure out why it's there. Onto the effect monsters, however, we can see some interesting monster lineup here. We have the Lava Golem, the Mephist, the Lady Assailant of Flames, Nudoria, Dark Geroid, Drolago, and Boganian. Honestly, not bad. It's some of the better effect monsters Marik has, and additionally, we can start seeing a little theme of burn in this deck. And this is going to make more sense once we read Twisted Personalities. As for the spell cards, again, Tribute to the Doom is great. Creature Seizure, we have a lot of vanillas, so that makes sense. Fusacian Bargain, again, vanillas makes sense, and Supply Squad, just individually very good. As for trap cards, we have Nightmare Wheel, Coffin Cellar, and Prideful Roar. Again, all really good trap cards. Coffin Cellar is more situational, but it's not bad. Now for the skill. The skill for this deck is Twisted Personality, and it reads, at the start of the duel, flip this card over. Each time you lose life points, place one counter on this card, max 3. Once per turn, during your main phase, you can use one of the following skills. Remove 2 counters from this card, then discard 1 random card from your opponent's hand. Remove 3 counters from this card, destroy 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. So this skill isn't that powerful when you read it out loud first try, just because it requires you to lose life points in order to make use of these effects. However, we can see that the pre-routed version of this card was significantly stronger than the one we have now, because the original text this card read was, each time a player loses life points, not yourself, but any player loses life points, you gain counters. And honestly, that is so unbelievably crazy. As it stands now, this skill isn't as good, just because it is very reliant on you particularly losing life points, and honestly, that's not that reliable. If it were the original version of the skill, this deck would be beyond broken, just because the effect to remove cards from your opponent's hand and then popping cards on their field, that's so powerful that it boggles my mind. But in the state that the skill is now, it's a lot more underwhelming. Alright then, so now it's time to grade all of Marik's decks. But before I do that, I did want to make a quick change to the tier list. I did have a lot of time to test out some of these decks, and oh my god, I completely underestimated how powerful the Harpy Lady strategy was. So this is honestly like top of S tier. I just wanted to make that quick correction before I went into Marik. Alright then, so as for Marik, in my opinion, the Dark Lucius deck is probably like a low A tier strategy. I understand that a lot of the cards in the year are pretty underwhelming, but overall the quality of the spells, the trap cards, and there's good enough monsters in here that it makes it a very viable and very reliable strategy. Not only that, but the skill is very, very powerful as well. So as soon as you're able to out any of your opponent's very powerful and very problematic monsters, you're able to take advantage of that with your Shadow Reborn skill. Or you could just summon one of your monsters. Let's say you establish your Dark Lucius level 8, you can revive it back to the field with your Shadow Reborn skill card. So honestly, I really appreciate all those attributes of this deck. As for the Twisted Personality strategy, if this was the original version of the deck, it would be top of S tier. It's just, the skill carries so unbelievably hard, the deck has so many options to go ahead and facilitate the skill, and just being able to just rip cards out of your opponent's hand and pop monsters as well is so powerful. However, it's not that version of the deck. Instead, you have to rely on a very watered down version of Twisted Personality, which is still strong, but in this version of the strategy, it pales in comparison. So honestly, even though it's not S tier, it's still like top of B tier in my opinion. You still have enough great cards in this deck that it makes it a very scary strategy to go up against. And again, it's not the hardest thing in the world to go ahead and establish the effect of Twisted Personalities, just because you do need a minimum of 2 counters to do something. So yeah, I think it probably belongs in a high B tier. And yeah, that's pretty much the list. Overall, I feel really good about it. Let me know in the comment section below if you agree with my choices, and if you do disagree with any of my choices, let me know what would you move up, move down, or what changes you would make overall. If you are interested in doing this list for yourself, there is a link in the description below that'll lead you straight to this tier list so you can do it for yourself. And if you do end up making one, feel free to tag me on either Twitter or Instagram so I can see what you guys got for your results. I'd love to see them, honestly. But with that, guys, I've been Topsy. If you did end up enjoying today's video, then a like would be very much appreciated. And if you'd like to support me as a creator, then a subscribe would be very much appreciated as well. I primarily focus on making Yu-Gi-Oh content, that being an emphasis on speed duels and other fun formats like progression series. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe. So with that, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.